Welcome to Fringe Pop 321, the show that believes the world is stranger than we think, but thinking should not be strange. This is a continuation of our series of interviews here on Fringe Pop, and this time we have with us Brett Prince from Ohio, correct?
Yes, sir. Yep.
Okay, you want to be more specific than that? You want to give away your home base location?
No, that's fine.
Okay.
I am in Columbus, Ohio.
Okay.
And I born and raised there, 40
right.
years. Yep.
Well, Brett, you have a dramatic, interesting story, and again, our viewers are going to get the link to your full story on the episode page, the interview page for this one. But I do want to get into it, so if you can give us an abbreviated version, and since I've seen your full story, I'll tell you where I want to land to begin with here. Basically, the drug use and the drift into Satanism and in the occult.
Sure.
Because what I'm going to angle for here at some point is, do you see those things as related in any way?
Okay.
So we'll just ask it this way. 5 years ago, who are you?
5 years ago, I was the poster boy of Luciferian, worldly, fleshly success, and was very good at it. Very rewarded as far as the things that society pushes, materialism, very dependent on substance abuse for happiness, devoid of any, for pleasure, devoid of any real happiness, seeking pleasures and momentary fleeting things, and just living the wrong way. And that entailed sexual depravity, drug abuse, lying, stealing, and even as far as murder.
Wow. So would you consider yourself an addict, or you were just doing it for pleasure? I mean, are those two related? Or because most people listening to this that have, you know, a drug problem in their history, I think they would sort of categorize it as, I couldn't help myself, I was addicted.
Sure.
So is that you, or were you just sort of recreational, pardon the pun, but on steroids? You're just doing it because you enjoyed it?
I'm not so sure there's a mutual exclusivity.
Okay.
I believe that I was doing it because I enjoyed it. I had the money, I had the means, I was able to do it en masse as much as I wanted it, but I was addicted in the sense that I needed it for happiness. I needed it for self-worth and identification. So it was not something that I think I could have stopped and felt fulfilled. So in that sense, I was addicted. Now, chemically, I don't think that I ever went too far with anything that was hard enough to make it detrimental to the point where it affected my life that way. Yeah.
Right. So that's a big part of your story. Again, the longer version on YouTube, of course, your own channel, and we'll make sure that viewers know where to look and where to find you and everything that you're doing now. But as far as, again, the backstory, give us a little bit of a history as to, you mentioned, you were the poster boy for Luciferian life.
Yeah.
So you got into drugs at one point, but your story is much bigger than that. So give us a bit of an overview that includes that, but take us down this road of how you went from experimenting or doing drugs for fun into, again, some of this darker stuff. Okay.
Well, essentially, I was born into a pretty conventional, standard conservative household. My mother was a Christian. She instilled those values in us when we were young. Never forced us to really go to church from the time we were able to say we didn't want to go. If we didn't want to go, we didn't. My brother opted out early. I kept going until I was 12. At 12, I decided to go ahead and give my life over to Jesus. Got baptized, and immediately afterwards came the lifestyle of the drugs and sex, and that just led way to a whole package deal of just living wildly. And essentially the drugs and the sex and the I don't want to say rock and roll, because rock and roll itself is not inherently bad, but that lifestyle that is implicated by that term, that is the Satanism and Luciferian. It's not identified that way, but that is absolutely the earth system that is detrimental to a person.
So you're not identifying that as some sort of a gateway, it's just part of this bigger whole. I mean, how would you characterize it? Because you have this, again, simplistic notion of you do this and then you're going to go to that and you're going to graduate and all that kind of thing. But I mean, that seems a little bit simplistic to me. If it's not, you feel free to correct me, but it just seems there's more going on than that.
It is a little bit simplistic. It's more of a complex thing to where I think how to vociferate that correctly. I think the same characteristics that lead a person to find identification and pleasure in drugs are the same ones that lead them to find that identification, self-worth, and pleasure in worldview systems.
Okay.
And I think that was a package deal of not only presentation from external, but who I was internally. So it is very complex. I don't think you can necessarily say, I smoked weed and I started worshiping the devil.
Right, right.
It's not that cut of an equation.
Right.
It is a complex thing, and it's a gradual, slippery slope that you don't notice that you're going down. To where inhibitions are lowered and you are opening yourself to new ways of life and thinking that may be different from where you came from. And seeing as I came from a Judeo-Christian, well, definitely Christian home, the antithesis of that is what I was exploring. And that was a package deal. And it wasn't so much of an equation, as you said, or a graduation of steps. It's a presentation of our whole society. And that's in the school system, that's in our entertainment, it's in our culture, it's amongst peers. So it becomes this giant, massive entity that's hard to really isolate each factor. But in hindsight, you can look at all the factors and say that they culminated and worked towards a worldview, a goal, a lifestyle that can only be identified in my eyes as Satanism. Yeah.
So now what you described sounds passive, like the culture was acting upon you. But again, since I've heard your testimony, I know you're not going to say, "Oh, I was just a victim here."
No, no.
I mean, you're exercising your will. You're making decisions, whether it was rebellion or this is helping you form an identity that you liked.
Exactly.
Again, tell us a little bit about that. I mean, what did you get out of this?
So as I'm grabbing these things in my early youth, in my early teen years to fill this void, I noticed that they come with some social rewards. If I'm smoking weed with the guys at the party, I'm now one of the guys at the party. As a kid, I was kind of, I was a sickly child, a lot of lung problems, so I was kind of a nerd. I was definitely a nerd. I stayed inside, I read, I had trifocals real thick. I was never a cool kid. Drugs.
That's even nerdier than I was at one
point. I was bad. I was bad. I'm still here. But the drugs gave me a cool card, I guess, that got me into social circles. And as that progressed, if you got more wild, you were cooler. The more that you could do, the more you were respected. The more girls that you started to interact with, the more that you got. So at first, it was generally presented, but once I saw what was there, and I think one of the mistakes that people make is to deny that there is pleasure. Oh, it's awesome. That's why you do it. It's not long lasting. There's no fruit there. It's bad. But as I saw that pleasure built social structure, then I started to understand that power came with those things and make the moves calculated and actually seek out those things. I wanted to do the most drugs. I wanted to have the most girls. I wanted to be in the most fist fights, things like that, to that effect. So I did actually start seeking it. But that's not quite what you're getting at, is it?
No, it's part because, I think when people listen to this and either, again, I think people who don't have this in their background, they always wonder, what in the world were you thinking?
Sure.
Because they can see, everybody knows somebody whose life has sort of been destroyed or is sort of a shadow of what it could have been because of, whatever thing, drugs, alcohol, whatever. So you got the number of people who would, again, ask, what in the world were you thinking? And then the other people who share this background, I would imagine they're listening to, things in your story that resonate with them. Maybe they do think, well, that's not why I did it for this other reason. But I think by and large, there's probably some connectivity there. In my family, I grew up with a stepdad who, really was my dad because he and my mom were married when I was 5, who was an alcoholic. So I don't know that I've ever met a person that's not affected, okay, by this in some way.
Mm-hmm.
And you naturally wonder, again, what in the world is going on? Like, why can't you see X, Y, or Z and stop this or that? So I get again, this gives you, this social world, puts you into these situations that you do get pleasure out of. It's advantageous. It feeds your ego. I hate to say it this way, but it rounds you out as a person.
And socialize, yeah,
right.
social
It's
structure,
just,
yeah.
it's this, identity building thing, which is, again, is kind of I don't want to say, maybe it's the wrong way to say it. It's kind of a shame to say, but that's just real.
That's absolutely real.
Right, that's
yeah.
real. So, you're enjoying these things. Was the drift into sort of occult, more like the imagery, was it just experimentation, taking Lucifer, taking Satan more seriously, so that it became like part of your own identity? Was that just like a next step? Was it sort of I'm going to add this to the resume now? What was the motivation there?
Well, as I entered that party culture as a young teen, that came in with, the music,
Mm-hmm.
and that was, hip hop, heavy metal, and all these things. As you listen to these things, you see a common theme. You hear names. You hear, certain messages are brought back and forth. And
Mm-hmm.
one of the, there were a few key groups and key figures as I was growing up. One being Marilyn Manson.
Okay.
And I remember in the mid-'90s when he came on the scene, he was known for ripping up Bibles and throwing them into the crowd. Well, that was sensational, and that's what drew me to him. But he's actually an intelligent guy, and there's more behind his music than just shock. He's
Mm-hmm.
very well schooled in like numerology and Kabbalah studies, and these words that I had never heard until it came from him
Mm-hmm.
and other people in that position of influence.
Right. So you're running into these things as you're attracted to these individuals.
Yeah, so I'm just partying, doing drugs, listening to drug music, and this drug music is also coupled with very real, esoteric, occult, and satanic messages.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not superficial. They're very rooted in old studies.
Mm-hmm.
And that was kind of my first inclination towards that was, what is Kabbalah? What is Jewish mysticism?
Mm-hmm.
And that led to, slowly acquiring little tidbits of knowledge here and there throughout my teens, to where I kind of got this impression that, the world that I grew up in, which was the Christian Western world,
Mm-hmm.
had been kind of, weaponized as a power trip, and that the true religion was out in these esoteric and regional and earth religions.
Did you get the impression that like Christianity had historically suppressed these things, and so this must be the truth? Is that what you're saying?
Suppressed them.
When
or
you say
stolen.
weaponized, that's what pops into my head.
Weaponized in the sense as it's looked at as a very bigoted belief system that keeps people from their pleasures just for the
Okay.
sake of being mean.
Okay.
That's the impression I had
Okay.
from it. And that's what it was presented. And without reading it myself, I just accepted those messages.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, I see, okay, these people are successful. They say this is not good and this works. So then I start seeing like the masonry things, all seeing eyes. It's in all music. It's in pop. It's in hip hop and all that. So that's where, that idolizing those figures and seeing what they were into and researching them as people and their interest is what got me into their interests.
Do you think a lot of these pop icons are really into this stuff, like intentionally, or do they use the imagery to draw attention to themselves?
I believe half and half.
Okay.
I believe some of them are very aware and seeking the power and okay with that world. Personally, that's where I was. Then I think there are people that are absolutely deceived, don't know what they're buying into, and are absolutely useful idiots, to use the term. A lot of people wearing the symbols and things that they're doing right now have no clue what they're even wearing. So you have those people that are, training ground for some of these pop stars that come up and just lead people into deception. Do some of the pop stars really know what they're doing? No, I would say not. I'd say they're deceived and they're being used as tools and puppets for people that know what they're doing. But I think there are people that are educated in it, and they know exactly what they're doing.
You put yourself in the group that sounded more sinister.
Hmm.
Okay, that you were a manipulator, you know, you're out to control. Were you conscious of that, or is that just you looking back?
Oh, I was conscious of it.
Right.
I took a lot of pride in it and being
Okay.
able to manipulate and deceive people. Yeah.
Yeah. What did your parents think about this? They were sort of passive or neutral about, you know, going to church and letting you make that decision like you described. So they had to think something
Hmm.
when you begin doing all this other stuff. What was their reaction?
I think by the time I actually got into the real deep stuff, the structured, like the Freemasonry, they had kind of been broken at that point, to be honest. They tried to fight off the early stuff, the Misfits, the Danzig, the kind of lower level stuff, but they gave up the battle. And then once that ball got rolling so far, there was really nothing they could say that would stop me. So they just loved me and didn't really address it. I wouldn't have listened. It would have drawn,
Yeah.
it would have put division. Yeah.
Right, it would have created even more conflict.
Yeah,
and
so
just-
yeah, they were smart.
Let's go through sort of a checklist of occult stuff.
Okay.
And what I'd like to hear from you is what made that thing interesting?
Okay.
Okay, what made it attractive? So we'll start with Freemasonry.
Power, straight power. The symbols that you see on the dollar bill in the streets of Washington, D.C. and spread across the world and over centuries at this point. And the biggest power players from Henry Ford to George Washington to Jay-Z,
Right.
there's power.
So there's a long history behind it. You look at the names that attach themselves to that for whatever reason in their own, you know, history, and it's like there must be something here that will benefit me.
Sure.
Okay. How about Gnosticism?
Didn't really do much for me.
Okay.
Yeah, that's kind of you're trying to New Age Christianity, get out of here.
Theosophy?
No, I like that.
Okay.
Yeah, that
What was the appeal there?
I felt like it was probably a more socially acceptable form of complete depravity. I mean, it packages it so nicely. It makes
Right.
it seem like it's a very quaint Eastern philosophy. And Blavatsky came and she sat with yogis and she was so cultured and worldly.
Right. So well read.
And it breaks back down to Babylon mystery. I mean, it all goes back.
How about occult magic? We'll just make magic a category. Like, you know, we have Crowley.
Yeah.
And others. What was it there?
The appeal of magic seemed hokey to me for a while
Okay.
until I got deep into Freemasonry. Until I didn't believe anything until I saw the people that believed it. When I realized that these very powerful, smart, educated people were doing these rituals and putting these magic symbols on things, I thought, okay, we've been told for however long there's nothing there, but they're still doing it. So why? Is there power behind the magic? And then I started researching magic and ended up getting into magic rituals. Yeah.
Now, was it a specific school? You know, you have this breakdown. There's like, just for lack of a better one, Enochian magic. I mean, were you like picking your niche here, or were you just experimenting with a whole bunch of things?
You touched on it with Crowley.
Okay.
I think because he was who he was, which was all sex and drugs. It was pretty much what his whole thing was. That appealed to me because that's what I wanted. I was very pleasure-based, didn't care the cost, and that magic in that sense of sex magic and drug magic and the transcendental experience from psychoactive drugs. That appealed to me. So
Now, as an outsider, I mean, true confessions here, I look at somebody like Crowley and go, yeah, really, like you're the most evil man in the world, and all you're doing is having sex and taking drugs. Like, how many millions of people do that?
yeah.
So I mean, you're not a Hitler, you're not a Pol Pot. You know,
Right.
I don't know if he ever killed anybody or not, but it seems like a bit of a cartoon, and maybe that's because of what the culture has done with, you know, Crowley, and I mean, he certainly fed that. It builds his reputation. But how do you look at him?
I think that he became a cartoon.
Okay.
I think he originated in some very real stuff. I think he took it even further than his contemporaries at the time and got very dark with it and really knew his stuff. I think his drug addiction and his sex addiction drove him mad. I think the danger with Crowley, though, is not what he did in his life, it's the effect that we are seeing today.
Well,
Crowley's,
how people imitate him or
Oh,
worship him, I guess might be a good
absolutely.
word. Yeah.
Crowley's hand is so heavy in our pop culture, a lot of people don't realize it, but once you know who he is, the connections that he made, and see it all trickle down, he was a lot more powerful than I believe a lot of people give him credential for.
While we're on him, I imagine you did some research or maybe had some experience, a similar experience. Let's talk about Crowley and Lamb, okay? You know, he meets this entity, or I don't know what the right word, I don't know what word he would use, channeled this entity or was encountering this entity. And if anybody's seen a picture of Lamb, it's sort of suspiciously like, you know, one of these aliens, like a gray alien. Again, like we like to poke fun at here in the studio, you know, over my shoulder here. But that was a big deal for him.
Yes.
So what do you think of that whole set of experiences, and did you ever, you know, meet something like that as you were sort of, you know, imitating him and trying to do what he was doing?
Okay, the first, I'll answer the second one because it's short. No,
Okay.
I didn't see any
Okay.
deities. I've never come in contact with a deity. I tried to invoke them, never seen one like he claims to. The idea of the lamb looking like an alien, it seems kind of funny, seems kind of cartoonish. I believe he also claimed to have met a Choronzon, several deities. I don't think we should take things that people say so lightly. I think we look back through history and we make the mistake of thinking that we're the smartest, most in tune culture that there ever was, and we totally dismiss anything that's not within our cultural script. But when people say that they interact with these things, I don't think we should be so dismissive. And I think we not only do that with individuals like Crowley, we do that with complete cultures, and we deny what their firsthand account is. And I think that's dangerous. If he said that, and he acted the way that he did, there's a chance that he could be sensationalizing that, absolutely. Might want to examine to see what exactly he's looking at.
Yeah, I would compare it to sort of, I mean, since I have an interest in ufology and, you know, the whole ancient aliens thing, because I'm sort of known as hopefully a somewhat friendly, you know, debunker of things like Zecharia Sitchin and whatnot. But that world sort of takes you into this world of the people who claim, you know, alien abduction. And my sort of default position is I'm going to assume you're not lying, okay, that you're not hoaxing. You may not be processing whatever it was that you experienced, you know, the best way, but I'm just going to assume that you're just not making it up, you know, for attention or whatnot. Because you get people that, you know, when they talk about these things, they get the ridicule. In other words, they suffer for it. It's not like I'm going to tell this story and then I'm going to go on, you know, Jimmy Fallon. I'm going to make lots of money. It doesn't work that way. You know,
Right.
you get a lot of ridicule, you know, for it. It brings, you know, personal crisis. So I would tend to agree, you know, with that. It's just, but I would also agree that the way Crowley is, the way he's sort of presented culturally, you know, I like the way you said it, that he sort of became a cartoon, because that's kind of what he is now. You know, if we want to, you know, spook somebody, we're just going to put his picture somewhere, you know, and not, that's really not taking him seriously. That's just trying to get an effect or get attention or something like that. What about, you know, other practices? We'll just make a real broad stroke here. Ouija boards, tarot cards, you know, all those sorts of things. You know, were you into any of that? Were those somewhere in the picture?
The closest I came was a grimoire,
Okay.
which was a book of spells, Black Magic Grimoire by E.A. Coding. It was the Book of Azazel. And I did do a ritual verbatim out of there. And it was an interesting experience. I was recording a one-man band album, which is where you do every instrument, drums, bass, guitar. And I come to the point where I was going to do this vocal, and I was kind of stumped. And at the same time, I'm reading this grimoire, not really knowing what I'm supposed to get out of it. And he's talking about how you can become a god, or you can invoke spirits, demons, D-A-E-M-O-N, which they say they're nice, they're good little guys. Just invite them in, and they'll help you do with whatever you want. And there's one that's specifically in that book about the arts. So I read the ritual, did it. I actually happened to be living in an Oddfellows temple at the time, which is an esoteric thing. Went down into the basement and put out the transmutation circle, did the ritual and everything. Did it, didn't feel anything, didn't see anything. But immediately after, I really did have the inspiration to record these vocals. I mean, I walked from that spot over to that spot and recorded it. And it was the entire album was 5 songs. It all had vocals, not one word that I knew what I said or planned. So looking back in hindsight, I didn't even really know what I was doing. I just said, just let the words flow through you. Just make guttural noises, you know, utterances that I don't know. Right. Looking back, I'm wondering, you know, what was that? Who was speaking? What were they saying? You know, was it a form of tongues from the other side? Mm-hmm. Not quite sure, but that was the closest that I came, was the by myself with an object. Mm-hmm. And that's outside of masonry, of course.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, when it comes to Satan and Lucifer, did you join a group, a coven? Did you do rituals, you know, there? In other words, and if you did, was that sort of a, again, I don't want to use the word graduate because that makes it sound like there's this step-by-step, you know, checklist kind of thing. But in a lot of the material I've read on this, that when people sort of get to that point, they almost present it like the apex of their journey or something like that. Mm-hmm. Anything like that?
Not necessarily. With Satanism, I was more of a LaVeyan Satanist, which was purely naturalism. It's atheism repackaged with a sensational title. So
and how does it differ from like Wiccanism or just your generic? I hate to use the word generic, but paganism.
You are your own god.
Okay.
Satan is a name that's invoked in spite of Christianity, as opposed to a deity that is known as the enemy.
Okay.
The enemy in this case, it doesn't exist. And it is an accusation of your natural tendencies. Mm-hmm. So they say, embrace your natural tendencies, embrace who you are, and just be everything you want to be. Go with your instincts, as long as you don't mess with anyone.
And is that Crowley again?
That's LaVey.
Okay. Well, he had this. You know, Crowley had this thing about do what you will.
Do what thou wilt. Yeah, I got that tattoo there. Yeah.
So is that similar or different, or what?
Well,
2 peas in the same pot.
Absolutely. LaVey stole everything from Nietzsche and Crowley, so that was where he got that. So at that point, I wasn't necessarily into a good side or a bad side. I just kind of thought we were in a neutral universe, and that I was just going to do carnally what I wanted because it didn't matter. As I progressed and saw that the powers that be, the very powerful players in the world, did believe in more, I started entertaining it. And that's when I feel like I switched over to a Luciferian, which is like the purveyor of human knowledge, not necessarily looked at as I want to do evil, which is deistic.
Did it just
Satanism.
Become more otherworldly? Like there was that element now?
Became structured.
Okay.
It became purposed.
All right.
It had leaders. I had mentors that weren't just other kids wearing Marilyn Manson shirts.
Okay.
These were doctors, lawyers, ATF agents, judges. These are the people that I did rituals with. And that's when things got serious. That was the progression. So there was a graduation. There was my own exploration, YouTube research, internet research, just finding out what I could. I like to read actual books.
Right.
Some people remember those.
Real books.
Yeah, go get those. And so I had a little more than the superficial, enough to where the Masons, they don't ask you to join, but they present themselves so you can ask them. And that's what pretty much I showed through my art, through my posts and my social networking posts, was I was moving towards that. So I was approached, and then when I became a Mason, that's when things got serious with magic, serious with intent, serious with thinking that this was all real.
Was you mentioned your art, okay, was your tattooing part of that?
Oh yeah.
That, sort of that, again, structural transition, or was it before, or is it kind of on both sides?
Well, the art, I actually started drawing Freemasonry symbols like I was one of them before I actually was inducted. So Mason actually saw the symbols and the things I was working into the fine art and tattoos, because I was putting this in people's tattoos too, sometimes without their knowledge. Sounds terrible, but I mean, I'm just being honest.
Well, that goes back to the manipulator, kind of thing.
Yeah. If I'm like, oh, hey, why don't we just put an owl here? And they're like, cool, owl. And I'm like, you got Moloch. So
Yeah.
I mean, like, it's not like I'm
Yeah.
being mean or hiding things. I'm just putting things that have different meaning for me
Right.
than what they know.
Right.
So I was putting that there, and the Masons actually said, well, this dude clearly knows a thing or two about a thing or two. So then I was approached, and I became an actual Mason, and that's where that came, was after the art first, then Mason, and then legitimate art that was accurate, you know. I was kind of hit and miss
Did the
before.
Luciferian turn have a role in the art, later on, or
Oh, absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely. As a matter of fact,
was it choice or time spent in perfecting whatever it was you were working on? I mean, how did that work itself out?
the Luciferian started shortly before the actual Freemasonry, because the time I actually became inducted, my first ceremony, I had this tattoo, and this
Okay.
is the sigil of Lucifer.
Right.
So I had already been embedded in that. That already worked. Now, footnote, they were totally cool with that. They were very cool with that, and that did not stop me. One of the Masons there was actually a Catholic priest. And the way that this is structured is there are people on each tier that don't know what's going on, on the next.
Okay.
This guy raised concern with the chaplain, said, hey, our new brother has sigil Lucifer on his face, and the chaplain says, we're cool with that. So the Luciferian art and movement kind of all happened at the same time as I was living in the Freemason temple, and my shop wasn't in the Odd Fellows Lounge.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Again, for the viewers that want the full story. Right. Yeah. They can go up and watch that on your site. Okay. So we've been talking about all this stuff you, past tense, were into.
Yes.
So you're enjoying this. You're getting the benefits that you presumed you'd get out of doing this, that, or the other thing. You like it.
Yep.
What happened? What made it unattractive at some point?
Well, I've said a few times since then that anyone that thinks that those pleasures are satisfying haven't had enough. Because at superficial value, they are. But when you truly try to live like that, they're not satisfying. You do not gain any long-term personal development, satisfaction. You're as empty as you were before you do any of it. So after about 25 years of living like that and doing it well and succeeding and was supposed to be really happy, I finally, looked at reality and said, this stuff is leading me to nowhere. I've got all the money, all the drugs, all the girls. I was living in a luxury apartment with, just massive substance abuse and a literal harem. I mean, a literal harem of escorts at my disposal, and I wasn't happy. Ended up moving out of that place and going to my own home for a year. It was very, very humble. And during that year, I reflected back on all the successes and the emptiness that was there, and reevaluated things. I said, I'm going to try stuff a little differently. Instead of, this situation fell apart, it was my relationship fell apart at that time, marriage, business and stuff. Instead of going further into this life, which I still had the option to do, it was all right there. I said, I'm going to hit the brakes on this and try something else.
When you say empty, is it just like a lack of meaning? Is that, something, there's nothing transcendent about this.
No.
I do this thing and I need to do it again.
Yeah.
Like it didn't meet any need. It didn't fill any void.
Not only do you have to do it again, you have to do more, and you have to do it more frequently. Now, coincidentally, I am a father, so I knew what real happiness was. I knew what real interactions that produced love and fruit were. So, as I was living this crazy lifestyle, I was able to separate it completely from my daughter. When she was around, I was a good dad, and I was at all the football games, and I was at the soccer games and gymnastics. And after 25 years of having both of them, I looked back and said, well, this one worked. And all my friends that are living this square lifestyle, they're happy. And I called them clowns and squares, and here I am. I'm the square. Yeah, I've got 21-year-old whiskey, that doesn't do anything, you know? I mean, you drink it, it's gone. Whereas real life interactions and the real stuff, you know, it appealed to me. So I had the option to continue, but it was just unattractive. Yeah.
So you go and you live by yourself, and what was the role of that in your transition and where you eventually came to?
I like to say I was put in a narrow place so that I could examine things. All the glitz and glamour were gone, so I was left with my thoughts, and I decided to start looking into more spiritual things. So I started back down the esoteric route of you know, looking through all that. Again, I'm like, these are quaint, these are lovely poems. Some of them are beautiful in imagery and mythology, but I can't look at the world around me and see that this is real. So through this pursuit, I was still doing YouTube videos and stuff. And one night, I remember I was bored, and I said, I'm going to watch a debate. And I got a little dram of whiskey, and I sat down, and it was David Berlinski and Christopher Hitchens.
Okay.
And I was like, oh, Christopher Hitchens, I wish I could clink glasses. You know, I know your breath probably smells like mine. Let's destroy this God boy. And at the end of it, I remember sitting there like,
he just ate his lunch.
who's this David Berlin? Like, what? There is a God.
Right. What just happened? Yeah.
And that led me down. I think the next video underneath that was astrophysicist finds scientific theory or method in Genesis, and it was Hugh Ross, and then Ravi Zacharias. So my effort just to laugh and scoff ended up blowing up in my face, and it left me questioning what I had believed until that point. So then I decided to look into Christianity. And
did you have any, like, oh, this is what my mom was about, or my mom and dad were about? Did that hold you back at all, or?
Oh yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, I had that decades ago, so that was why I was like, nope. And also, you know, being part of that culture, it was everywhere, so I never really, that was the last option to look at for some reason.
Okay.
I thought for some reason maybe the societal guilt or something. I was like, our way can't be right. The East seems more quaint, you know, so I went with that, and then Christianity was the last.
So what, describe for us, you know, your transition now. You're looking into, you know, real, you know, theism, Christianity. What, fill in the gaps for us? What happened?
Still checking out like the Hermetica, things like that. And after the Berlinski thing, I started kind of looking at what parts were valid, like, you know, really searching out explanations for difficult things. And this was the summer of 2016 when this happened. I would say around August when the debate happened. And through the fall, I kept looking and looking at stuff, and as each thing, I was like, well, this can't. I found the loophole here, and I'll go find it. You know, Jesus could not have ascended. No one of reputable source would say that. Okay, Luke's a doctor. Okay, and he's a historian. Okay. So as I encountered this information, my brain knew without a doubt that this was accurate, verifiable, and historically, you know, checkable, testable. So it took a minute for my heart to catch up, and that part wasn't so glamorous or as fun as, you know, philosophers and great debates. On December 31st, I was sitting in my house, and you know, Christmas had passed. I already heard all the Jesus I wanted to hear. It was weighing on me anyways. I was kind of mad that it was in my face because I knew it was the truth and I didn't want to deal with it. And I admit that entailed admitting I was wrong for decades and changing my life. So I kept denying it, and one day it was on the TV. Shouldn't have been there, so I turned it off. I grabbed Brief History of Time, and I'm like, just flip it open because I'd read the book. I just wanted to touch base. I actually ended up on the part where it's the creation argument, if God started the world with rules or if he intervenes, you know, going through some of the entertainment there. Man, there's God again. So I opened up a magazine. There's Jesus again. So I said, all right, I'm going to Facebook. And this was literally like everywhere. It was making me
Everything
mad.
you turned on.
And I put it on Facebook, and I was like, all right, flipping through there, and I saw Shawn Michaels, the Heartbreak Kid. He's a wrestler, real bad dude at the time, known for his drug addiction, his womanizing, and pretty much everything I was all about. And I thought, gotcha, Jesus. You will not be here. and opened it up, and it was his testimony. So I decided to keep the dignity and skip the flood, and you know, because I thought that might be the next sign, and I hit my knees and just started bawling for a good half hour, realizing that I had been wrong, and that wasn't really the part that made me sad. It was the fact that you know, I felt immediately, and knew that I had been forgiven of everything, like everything, and I was like trying to go through my head and apologize for it, and it was like, doesn't matter.
Right. You
That's done.
don't need the grocery list.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's done. That's covered. So, and that was December 31st,
Wow.
2016.
Now, did you remember that? Essentially, did you remember the gospel because of what you had heard in the past, or you had as you're going into these different sources, you run into it? Was it a little bit of both, or?
I did. My mother insisted on the readings, is what we called them. Every Christmas, she would make us read The Life and Times of Our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ by Charles Dickens. And he actually did a really good job of relaying the Gospels in an easy fashion. They separated it over 24 parts, so you read one every night for December, and then 25th.
Yeah.
You know. And you know, all of the miracles. Jesus' life was all in that. I mean, I don't know if you're familiar with the book.
No, I haven't read it.
It's a great account. But yeah, so as I was going through that, I was remembering things. And then little things like my mom would wake me up every day saying, "This is the day the Lord has made. Let us be glad and rejoice." So, so I was raised up in the way. But I roundly rejected it. It was done.
What would you say to somebody now who, again, if you could talk to yourself, you go back and 5, 10, whatever number of years ago, and because I'm sure you with your web presence, you meet people who are just like you. So how do you have that conversation? How do you advise them? How do you say, no, this is just going to take you to nowhere, and your attention needs to be here and not there? I mean, how do you handle that conversation? What would you say to yourself, and what do you say to people now?
I don't so much tell them, I don't really do the warning of, no, you're wrong, this is going to lead you, because I don't think that would have worked with me. If you told me I was wrong, I'd automatically dismissed you. Instead, what I do, like and generally the thing is, a lot of stuff is esoteric, or the New Age studies. I direct them to sources that I know will enlighten them on other things, and move them towards the gospel, if not the actual gospel itself, if they're ready for that. But I know for myself, it was step by step. Little things like debates. Oh, you're a big Hitchens fan. Have you seen him debate Berlinski? No, you should check that out, and leave it at that. Little seeds, little tiny seeds is how I that's.
Do you think that okay, well, I'll just say the church, either do you think the church, or are there specific ministries that you think do a good job with people like you? Does the church generally drop the ball here, or is it sort of like, well, they're kind of okay? I mean, how would you assess how, again, Christians generally, or the church, interacts with people like yourself? And if there's some gap there, I mean, what would you recommend, or maybe a specific source, or is there a ministry that really does this well?
I believe to give credit where credit is due. I felt very loved by all the believers in my life through all my turmoil, and I know that I received prayers. So that is one thing I want to commend them. Other than that, there's two parts to this. One, I wouldn't have received anything anyways. Two, they don't know how to even address what I know. I find that the church runs so quickly from anything that is not their doctrine that they will not understand it and don't know how to deal with it or explain it or rebuke it, debunk it, or anything. I think you have to understand what you're talking about to advise on it. And understandably so, they're scared. But they shouldn't be, because, knowing who we are filled with and what side we're on, we should be very confident in all of our endeavors to face those things head on. I think there's not much ministry for it. There are a few people out there that have converted, from that extreme to this, but it's definitely the exception. But
I mean, there's a lot of ministry, like for broken people, like with addiction, or you know, this or that specific problem, but like in the whole esoteric occult thing,
Yeah.
again, again, this is just my perception as an outsider in terms of experience and sort of, you know, somebody who, you know, I'm interested in this material and I you know, try to interact with it myself. But it seems like it just really freaks people out.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, they might be willing to hear you talk about it as a Christian.
Yeah.
But that's a whole lot different than sitting down with somebody who's into this
Mm-hmm.
and either, again, knowing what to say or just not getting freaked out.
Yeah.
So, I mean, how do you, now you have, tell us what you're doing now, because you obviously are trying to fill the void here a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
How do you approach this now in terms of ministry, an online presence, or what is it that you're doing?
Me personally, I have a YouTube channel
Mm-hmm.
and a website in conjunction with it called The Good Ground Ministry.
Okay.
The website is thegoodgroundministry.com, and what I'm doing is just little short videos, no theme to anything, just little pieces of information that I encountered on the way, because that's what led me to faith.
Mm-hmm.
I gave the analogy that you know, the path that's laid by, or that's formed by laying one stone at a time. And they're not all the same, they're not all related, but at the end you have a path.
Mm-hmm.
And that's essentially what I'm doing. And I'm putting each little, you know, piece that I know, and then the truth with it, you know, the deception that I am aware of, and then the truth with it. And just, you know, have fun little entertaining videos without, you know, with staying away from dumbing down Christianity or
Mm-hmm.
watering it down or presenting it in a new hip fashion.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, you know, I'm giving little anecdotal things to help people realize that what they're being fed isn't completely accurate or even educated.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Wow. So give your site and your channel out one more time.
It's The Good Ground Ministry,
Okay.
and the website is thegoodgroundministry.com.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there anything new that's like on the horizon that you're planning to do, or is it just sort of expanding on that?
Always. I've got.
Can you
It's,
say anything? Don't give away the store if you don't want to. Here.
Not really anything that's completed to. I've got a lot of concepts, a lot of ideas, inspiration. What I'm doing right now, as a young Christian, I'm at a crux.
Okay.
I've been given this platform of 6,000 followers at this point, which is a lot for me. And to be on, I'll be very candid. I feel like the platform that I have exceeds my development as a Christian.
Mm-hmm.
So what I'm doing right now is trying to balance that and not step too far away from where I should be, but still use the platform and provide information to keep people, you know, like, just be very honest with who I am, where I'm at, and the information that I'm providing.
Well, chances are that'll actually attract people, because you can file that under just being authentic.
Yeah.
You know, and that's a big deal.
Yeah, and so right now the plans, I'm just kind of praying and letting God lead me where they are, jumping on opportunities like this to get out and share, not denying anything that I feel the Spirit is leading me to do that will produce fruit, and you know, just trying to buckle down. I don't have a plan, but
Yeah,
I don't think you need
I often
that.
say that too. Yeah, and I don't worry too much about it.
No, my plan is to follow the Spirit, and since I have been doing that, a lot better than the previous 40 years. I've really improved, so yeah.
Well, thanks for taking the time to come here and talk with us and share your story and what you're doing, and just the, you know, the transition, really the testimony you know, that you have, and your willingness to not, you know, sort of keep regretting everything, but, you know, really having a grasp on the gospel, and then, you know, knowing that it's a platform now. You know, it's redeemed. You know, it's both redeemed in past tense, and it can be redemptive in the future too.
God is good.
Yeah, thanks.
God is good. Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks for watching Fringe Pop 321. Please come back and watch more of our interview series, and of course our episodes. And don't forget to visit our website for more information about our guest and everything we do here, because what you know may not be so.